welcome in everybody to another episode of the Brett Allen Show. Thanks for watching and listening. And this conversation today has been in the making for quite some time. We are chatting with Hollywood director, writer, producer, toy collector, author, Brian Levant. I mean, I don't even know. We were joking before we started taping. I'm not even sure where to start in this conversation. We'll start with his book, My Life in Toys, which is really sort of the initiation for me reaching out. And then, of course, his film degree of just, of course, Jingle All the Way, which I think everybody's seen at least once. The Flintstones, Leave It to Beaver, Beethoven. Okay, I'll let you talk now. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Now that there's no Saturday morning cartoons, I have nothing to do on Saturdays.
I know. Yeah, that was such a part of a lot of people's childhoods. And yeah, those Hanna-Barbera, all of those days have long gone. But you have this book that I think is just absolutely phenomenal, My Life in Toys. And really, and you probably do a much better job of describing this, but really sort of a culmination of your life of collecting and sort of stories and that sort of thing of going along with each toy and the collection of them. You wrote this book. It's been out for a while, but what was sort of the genesis or the idea of putting it together?
Well, you did kind of hit the nail on the head. It is a work that is a summation of both 50 years in collecting and 50 years of working on TV shows and films and a lot of stuff that never even made the screen. And it didn't intend to be so. I wanted to document my collection. Was the initial thought, but it became so much more. For instance, I have never written in my own voice, and even the few times I've spoken at funerals and things where it was definitely coming from me. It was about someone else and not about me, and it took me a long time to literally find my voice, and the fact that my photographer and brother-in-law, Joe Pellegrini, was one of the top commercial tabletop, especially food photographers in the country. Lived in Chicago and I'm in LA. So every time I'd go to Chicago to visit family, I'd bring a box of toys and we'd spend a day cleaning, shooting, rewrapping, putting away and shipping. And so that was a long process. And along the way, kept adding things to collections. but it is a monstrous book. It just came out from G Editions this past September 13th. And it's doing really well on the charts that are available to me, which is amazing because unfortunately it is an expensive book, and it's an expensive book because it is 480 pages, which focus on over 1,100 original photographs are in it, and it is also it's a coffee table book the size of a coffee table, and that's intentional. I wanted to be able to pour over the images and the characters that I and millions and millions of others love, and also to introduce them to things they might not have been privy to. So things that pop up in collecting and in my journey and learning about comedy that encompass silent comedy and silent comedians and the toys and the toys that were produced from Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy and the Marx Brothers and the Marx Brothers, who were a huge influence on me. Also, all the posters and Spanish heralds and everything that I've collected over the years, and found a way to tie all these things together. And the way they tie together is these are very disparate things, but they are all under the umbrella of my interests, and I have wide-ranging interests. And it was very difficult to get the book published, to tell you the truth, because number one, people didn't want a 480-page book. They want a 200-page book that they can charge $29, $38 for. And they also were very wary of something that wasn't a single subject. But, and it is a book without captions. Many wonderful photographic books by collectors, including the great book designer Chip Kidd's book, Batman Collected. He every single item is notated as who made it, what year, and things. And number one, that kind of stuff never concerned me. I'm much more of a visual person, and that kind of thing kind of interfered with the presentation. But it was also, such a journey through my career that and the influences that formed it. I'm gonna pick this up and hang it up.
I love it.
And disconnect this while I talk. Sorry, I should have done this before.
That's okay.
But, I really discovered what a tremendous influence that the things I watched growing up became in my life. And, when you are 5 years old and you watch the premiere of Leave It to Beaver, you have no idea that that 30 years later, you're going to be presiding over the show on its 30th anniversary, still in the middle of what was at the time the largest series order in the history of television.
Yeah.
And when you're 8 years old and watching the premiere of the Andy Griffith Show, you could never expect that 16 years later you would be writing for Ron Howard, or that when you watched the premiere of 1960 of the Flintstones on Friday night, that one day you would have creative control over the franchise and its translation from a 2D property to a big budget 3D movie.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's just, I will get into that, but
but the weirdest thing about all those things is that they all generated a huge amount of products.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Lunch boxes and figures, and they're still producing them, and I'm still collecting them.
Yeah, it's a good lesson in the fact that we were joking. I'm 48, and I had a lot of toys that we collected growing up, and then a lot of things that wound up getting thrown out and gone. And interestingly enough, I learned this too, sort of as a caveat to this topic, because this book really is about you and your life and who Brian is, and why we have gotten some of what I consider to be iconic and classic films in the 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s and on, really, of these properties. It's crazy. I was going through this book and just looking at all these beautiful pictures and collections, and it really is your voice. I mean, it made sense to me. I had the realization last night as I was going through this. And I am going to buy a hard copy too, because I'm going to go out and look for it today. I know Target has it here in Colorado, so we're going to go get
it. Some people have complained about the price of the book, and yesterday Amazon ran a special where they reduced it over 20%.
Yeah.
So I would urge people to look for that, and anywhere that does price matching.
Yeah, price matching. So this book and all of these toys that you have collected over the years, I think it's not a specific audience that it would reach, but I think there's probably a genre in there somewhere that really has a connection with you in this book, because it's just fascinating, all of these things that you've collected over the years. The first one that you ever got your hands on that made you go, this is something that I have to keep getting my hands on these? Was it at a very young age? Was it sort of later on in your life?
I was always a toy person, and I think a lot of this has to do with the saturation of advertising by toy manufacturers on what used to be a exclusively the kids space.
Yeah.
That on Howdy Doody, for instance, Howdy Doody had I believe at one point over 2,000 licenses from everything from frozen foods, bread, shoe polish, flocking for Christmas decorations, figures, bedroom furniture, pudding, Kellogg's. It just was an endless string, and they promoted it in the 50s. There was no barrier between entertainment and commercials. All of a sudden, I mean, great example, in the middle of Burns and Allen, Harry Von Zell would walk in with a tray of coffee and Coffee Mate, and they'd be sipping it and talking about it during the show. Buffalo Bob would say, kids, tell mom to buy this. And everybody said, tell mom to buy that. And if you collect all 5 coupons, you get something free. And there's something at the bottom of the cereal box, which was promoted. And the cereal was promoted across the Lone Ranger and Superman. and Hanna-Barbera, Kellogg's was the exclusive sponsor of the Huckleberry Hound Show, which was Hanna-Barbera's big breakout in 1958. And it was a syndicated show, a half hour that launched Huckleberry Hound, and Jinx and Pixie, and Yogi Bear, who was spun off 2 years later into his own series. But they had to deal with Kellogg's, and Kellogg's featured Hanna-Barbera characters on the front of the boxes, and there were Hanna-Barbera prizes inside those boxes. So they had you coming and going. And in the 50s and 60s, number one, grocery stores didn't have the hours they have. But seriously, in Chicago growing up, you couldn't buy meat on the weekends.
Wow.
And the market's closed. So with lack of childcare as well in those areas, you were going shopping with mom and pulling on her dress to get you OK cereals with Yogi Bear's picture on the box.
Yeah, I did the same thing to my parents. Interestingly enough, I want to ask you this because I think you would probably have the answer. McDonald's, they are probably one of the only people who have licensing agreements, I would assume, with pretty much any film that comes out, because every time we go through a drive-through,
well, it's gone now. It's gone. There was the golden era of the Happy Meal, and I think they're going to become prime collectibles as time goes on, and the array of things. And I can only speak from my experience with the Flintstones, that what they did, that the Happy Meals that they made were terrific, imaginative, using our artwork, our cars, our buildings, and the displays were beautiful. And they did a line of glass coffee cups, Flintstone cups.
Yes, I remember
that were terrific. And they had the McRib box. Was a duplication of our Rock Donalds in Bedrock. Our big joke was over 5 dozen served.
I love it.
Yeah. Wow. And then and they did this hundreds of times, and these things were planned for years. Those tie-ins, with Space Jam, with all the products in the 80s and 90s. And now I think I think maybe Wendy's and maybe Jack in the Box does a little bit, but McDonald's seems to be out of that business pretty much. And it was a huge promotion, but now again, movies don't get. There's not enough movies really to fuel that pipeline.
No, well, that brings me to the next thing I want to ask you, but I do want to wrap up and make sure we get everything out of this about the book. Because that's what
we could be here for weeks, Brett.
I know. Well, I have to say, like, this book is really a love letter to my childhood, and to a lot of people's childhoods. And I think, I really want to encourage people. We'll put links in the show notes for this, for people to go look at this. Because I spent 2 or 3 hours late last night just pouring through this and reading the captions and the explanations of things. And um, it's just important, I think, for people to get this, because it's just really like part of a time frame and a time capsule that just, like as you said, may not exist anymore. And not to mention all the films that you've written and directed. Um, but yeah, this is a great book. If there was one thing that you really hope that people get from it, is there one thing that you can pinpoint, sort of your,
Yes,
you
no,
know,
no.
your
I
thesis to why you want people to look at this book and read it?
well, I think that collecting is about passion, about displaying your individuality, and you know, and there are, along with that is shared experience, uh, and and I have tried to imbue the book with the passion I have, not just for collecting. And I'm a rotten collector by collecting stand. I don't care about, I'm in the box. I don't buy mint, hardly ever. It's almost more important for me to see something that has, time has added another layer to it, something that was once loved, and you can see that kind of wear. You know, on Amigo Superman, when the paper logo is almost wiped off, you know somebody's spent hundreds of hours going with a super villain.
Yeah.
And you know, I I wanted to also show these things as I see them, that that toy manufacturing, particularly in the days before style guides were so restricted, that this is art. This is people's interpretation many times of the characters. In Japan, where they modeled many of the early Flintstone toys, you know, number one, they didn't see the show in color. It wasn't
Yeah.
in color. So they just made up the color scheme. It had nothing to do with reality. And it was their interpretation. It's much more like fan art. And that toys are art, and we presented them as such. And that's why it deserved the scale and the intense close-ups that Joe provided us. And you know, I'm a guy who has always drawn inspiration from my collecting, from sitting there and getting lost in it and letting your mind wander. And it's such a crazy coincidence that so many of the things that I was interested in and loved became my jobs, and in order, and jobs that I loved. I mean, I can't tell you what it was like to be 23 years old and being on staff on Happy Days, which at the time, you know, my the first was it my son? Yeah, the first episode I ever wrote actually became that was the week that they went to number one for the first time. And you know, certainly I had almost nothing to do. I had nothing to do with that, to tell you the truth. But to experience beyond, in a once in a generation hit, and learn how to take the success that they forged and apply it, and the knowledge that I learned there, to other shows I worked on, the Bad News Bears and Mork and Mindy, that I produced, and it's in its later days. You do a show on that one, and reviving Leave It to Beaver, and making a TV movie out of it, a very successful one, a long running series filled with wonderful memories, and a so-so feature that I didn't have much to do with.
You're like, I want to be clear about the feature.
Yeah.
That's funny. That you're like, you know, this is going to live on the internet forever. So you want to be clear if somebody
No,
comes along and picks out a clip. No, I'm teasing you, but I get it. Yeah.
I know, but and then you know, to be truthful, in 1968, I was not the biggest Scooby-Doo fan when it debuted. You know, I by that time, I had a car, I had a girlfriend. Saturday mornings, I was playing in a basketball league, uh, But when I heard that the Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers wanted to do a new series, kick it off with a movie, and then segue into a series, I said, I like Hanna-Barbera work. I like the safety net, having a property that has 99% recognition among the public, and that's true from Poland. And it was a wonderful time with that. But I had never collected Scooby-Doo until I started directing and producing Scooby-Doo movies. And I'm so sorry that we only did 2 with that wonderful cast, anchored by Robbie Amell and Haley Kayoko and Nick Pilatus and Kate Melton. A great group, and in the end, I was just talking to a group from a show. They invited me to speak to them because they're just getting somewhere and stuff. And what I told them was, in the end, the most important thing in a job is the experience itself, whether it is successful, as many of mine have been, and failed, as many of mine have done. In the end, what you take with you is the strength and passion of the experience. And I've been fortunate that the things I loved also provided so much enjoyment, and there are things that I learned to love.
Yeah, and it's all continued to live on in this age of streaming, of Netflix and Hulu.
Yeah.
And I don't even know. I was counting the other day. I think there's 25 streamers total. And I'm not talking just the big ones. I'm talking
like AMC Plus.
Tubi, Snapchat is now getting into the streaming game. So I have a question here from somebody, because I put it out in a Facebook group that we were talking, and they had a question, and it kind of sparked my interest too. So if you're okay with that, we'll ask it. You did the Flintstone films, and there was cast changes between the two. People always find that fascinating as to why, if you were making the first one and you didn't know there was going to be a second one, or people became more famous and weren't available. I mean, they're both great films. Viva Rock Vegas is probably my favorite, if I'm being honest.
When I showed Viva Rock Vegas to Mr. Spielberg the first time, he turned around and said, "I think you made a better movie." Audiences didn't agree, but
well,
no. But what happened very, very, very simply is this: that Amblin saw the box office. The film grossed in 1994 $352 million in its initial release, which today is well over $1 billion.
Wow.
And you have to consider that there were half the movie theaters in the world that there are today. For instance, in Japan in 1994, they'd never seen the cartoon. It was distributed for like 8 weeks ever there. And still, we did huge numbers and stuff. But anyways, so and Amblin wanted to do the same thing they did with Back to the Future and shoot 2 and 3 back to back. And what happened was, I believe, is John Goodman, walking through airports, got tired of people going yabba dabba do.
I can imagine. Oh my God.
And he did it. He threw himself into it. As few people would. He did a spectacular, so spectacular that I think, as soon as you saw him in the skin, you said, "Oh yeah, that's perfect," But he did not want his, and even though he would have made a tremendous amount of money, that you have to respect him as an artist.
Yeah.
So
I get it.
And so we pivoted, and we had not begun to develop scripts or anything. It's not like he put us into a big hole or anything. And we had talked during production. Bruce Cohn, the Academy Award winning producer, then on his first producing job, he and Colin Wilson, also a Best Picture Academy Award winner, and 20 years after Flintstone, these guys had Best Picture Oscars, and I was doing Scooby-Doo. But anyways, we talked about, kind of jokingly, Viva Rock Vegas. And I wanted to do a full musical. In the end, we had the musical finale, and we got Anne Margaret, the only person who'd ever been in Viva Las Vegas, and the Flintstones, to do a tune for us, along with Elvis's guitar player James Burton, also contributed to that tune. And so we made something, and you know, in hindsight, you know, maybe you quit while you're ahead, but again, the experience was so incredible to creatively to have to kind of be the engine behind designing 6,000 props, costumes, sets, everything. Just imagine everything in the freezer, and that giant ice freezer in the Flintstones. When Wilma walks in, that you had to have, you know, the bird's eye frozen vegetables, and the bird was a pterodactyl. You know, Fred's watch was a sundial, but we did a crude version of a Mondavi when he got money.
Oh, it's just, I mean, I have to tell you, that is such a fun movie. In fact, if you go to Universal Studios today, we went recently, you could see props from that film still there for people to watch, and to see. Well, I tell you what, I mean, those were all great movies. You've done so many, and I again, just the list is miles long. Of course, Jingle All the Way, which is a holiday classic. I know you talked
a financial disaster, and yet I think it's even above a cult classic.
Far above.
Last year, for the 20th anniversary, I have to tell you, I was touched by the outpouring of affection for the film. I was thrilled when I just read that Funko announced that their biggest selling item at Walmart, the largest retailer in the country, was the recreation of the original Tiger Toys talking Turbo Man figure that they sold for $35, while the originals you can get on eBay for like $800 to $1,200.
It's ridiculous. I was Googling it actually, because I just was sitting here kind of waiting for us to connect, and I was just kind of checking it out. Yeah, it's like I saw one going for like $1,100, and it's like, you're not my number one customer. I'm not interested. Anyway, it's a great film. We watch it in this house every year, along with all the other classics. And I mean, all your films we've seen. We kind of got into the Leave It to Beaver phase for a while. I don't know. I mean, you have an amazing body of work. The films are great. The book is fantastic. So now you're working on other projects, and you have a lot of things cooking as far as what you're up to now.
Not a lot. I do have in serious development. I sold an original story for a CGI animated musical to Illumination Entertainment, the maker of the Minion films and Despicable Me and all the Dr. Seuss films. And that is being produced, and the music written in part by Pharrell Williams. So I'm very happy about that. And I continue to teach at both the University of Arizona, where I'm currently at for the next month, and at the University of New Mexico, where I'm trying to give people an opportunity to learn the things that I wish I'd known when I tried to go over the wall that separates the student filmmaker from the professional.
Wow. I mean, just so much success that you've had, I feel, is so well deserved. And the book and the films, I mean, you've just created a world for people's life, and a place that we can go when we just want something fun to watch that's good. I thank you so much. Or read, yes. And I'm excited to see what magic, and I really do mean that, comes out of your world next. Brian Levant, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.